Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror and mystery in film, television, books, and in popular culture. Well, greetings once again, everybody. Welcome to our latest show. This is episode number 130 of the Ghostly Gallery. My name is Bruce Markusen. Glad to be with you. And as always, I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you?
I'm doing really good, Bruce. Been getting some really great weather on the go here in Nova Scotia, so that's always a smiling time. How's everything been going with you?
Not too bad. I mean, this has been weather-wise the worst winter in memory here in central New York, and I don't think it's been much better north of the border where you are. But we're looking forward to the start of spring, the start of baseball season,
Mhm.
and the continuation of lots of interesting movies coming up in the genre of horror during the spring and summer of 2026. So it's good things. Looking forward to, absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally agree. Absolutely.
So before we jump into tonight's show, we're going to be putting the spotlight on two films that came out in 2025. We'll tell you quickly what those films are. Abraham's Boys is the first interesting film that is a continuation of the Dracula story. And then after that, we'll discuss another 2025 film called We Bury the Dead. Before we delve into those two cinematic productions, let's talk a little bit, Tracy, about this article. And I should mention this was sent to me by our good friends, Michael Dante and his wife, Mary Jane Dante, big supporters of the show. Michael, longtime actor. We've had him as a guest on the program. He was one of the key players in the 1970 film Willard, and has done a lot of other films, not just horror, but dramatic productions. He's had a long, long career, very successful career. They're great people as well, Michael and Mary Jane, and they were kind enough to send me this article from USA Today. It's written by one of their film critics named Brian Truitt. And the article has a great headline, title, I should say. It's called The Fangs Come Out. And in this, Brian Truitt ranks the top movie Draculas from Bela Lugosi to Caleb Landry Jones. So he gives us his top 10. We've both had a chance to give this a look over, and we'll offer some thoughts on it. Very quickly, we're going to give you the top 10 from Brian Truitt. At number 10, so this goes in reverse order, this is actually an animated film. It's Adam Sandler in Hotel Transylvania series of films. The first one came out in 2012, so we get a cartoon version of Dracula. At number 9, we have the latest Dracula. We talked about this film. Caleb Landry Jones starring as the famed vampire, directed by Luc Besson. Then at number 8, this was kind of a surprising choice. Nicolas Cage from the 2023 movie Renfield. We talked about that on a past show. It's very much a comedic and also sinister version of Dracula. Then at number 7, we go back to classic horror, 1943, a movie that I love, very underrated, Son of Dracula, Lon Chaney Jr., his lone turn as the vampire. Then we go to 1979, Frank Langella's interpretation of Dracula. Then at number 5, we go way back to the silent era, 1922, Max Schreck as Count Orlok in the original version of Nosferatu. And even though he was not called Dracula, it was certainly a Dracula story. They changed the name of the Dracula character to Orlok and the other names of the characters to basically German versions of the characters. It was for copyright reasons because they knew the Bela Lugosi estate was not very happy. So they called it Nosferatu. They called the vampire Orlok. Max Schreck, very, very memorable in that one. One of my favorites is Gary Oldman in Bram Stoker's Dracula 1992. That was certainly an unusual version. And then at number 3, the most recent Nosferatu, Bill Skarsgård. We talked in depth about that. Great interpretation by him. At number 2, Christopher Lee, who played the vampire, played the Count in many films, starting in Horror of Dracula in 1958. And then at number one, not surprisingly, the King of Horror, Bela Lugosi, the original Dracula, 1931. So that's the list. Tracy, now that you've had a chance to look at that article, anything that jumped out at you about it?
I thought these were really good choices. In interesting order. I love some of these movies. Um, I was really surprised that Gary Oldman and Bram Stoker's Dracula was only number 4. I thought it might have been bumped up a little bit, but
Mhm.
I was super surprised to see Adam Sandler's movie on here. I admit I've never seen it, but it sounds really cute. If Dracula can be cute, it should be a cute movie.
Yes.
But, I was really kinda happy to see Renfield on there because that's such a wild ride movie and
Yeah.
just such a cool take on that story. Um, and also really interesting that the newest movie is on there with Caleb Landry Jones.
Right.
Um, really interesting just because maybe it's just because it's a newer movie, a totally different vibe than what I would have expected, but
Mhm.
overall, some really great titles. Yeah. How about you?
Well, let's start with Adam Sandler. I have not seen Hotel Transylvania other than, snippets of it and maybe highlights of the film.
Mhm.
I'm not sure about including a cartoon version of Dracula here. I mean, if you're gonna do that, why not include Count Chocula and all those
Oh,
great commercials that he used to do, back in the '70s, '80s, probably into the '90s. They still have Count Chocula all these years later. Well, I haven't seen the commercial in many years. So I guess that's a little bit of a stretch to include an animated version of Dracula, but I suppose you could do that.
mhm.
Caleb Landry Jones certainly gave a unique interpretation. The look quite different, wore the top hat, which was maybe a nod to John Carradine, who played Dracula in a couple of movies for Universal and also
Mhm.
for some other studios as well. You could really have made an argument that Carradine should have been somewhere here in this top 10.
True.
I thought, was a very fine actor and did a good job as Dracula. Gave it kind of a skeletal look, but he was quite good in his roles. He wasn't given as much material to work with as Bela Lugosi, but with what he had, with what he was given, I thought he did very well. So interesting that you had Caleb Landry Jones and Adam Sandler at 9 and 10, respectively. But then there were some folks that were omitted that could have been included. And I'll tell you one that I definitely would have included. This is a 1958 movie, and I understand why it wasn't part of this because it's not that well known. It's called The Return of Dracula. It's a black and white film. It came out about the same time as Horror of Dracula with Christopher Lee. Didn't get a lot of attention, but Francis Lederer is outstanding as Dracula. I mean, he was really oily and crepey and kind of reminiscent of Lugosi in some ways. I thought he was terrific. He only did it really once, although he did do it in an episode of Night Gallery, Rod Serling's old show, where
Really?
he appeared. Yeah, it was very briefly. It was sort of a like a short vignette in between two feature stories,
Mhm.
and he played Dracula, somewhat done for comic effect, and it was very short. It was a few minutes,
Right.
but that's the only other time I remember Lederer doing it. But in the Return of Dracula 1958, I mean, he's the star. He is the key player here, and he is really quite creepy, scary, sinister in that movie. So he's a guy I would have found room for him somewhere in this top 10. Another one that I think would have included Jack Palance, 1974, Dan Curtis's Dracula, also known as Bram Stoker's Dracula. Palance, kind of beefy, he was a little bit more solidly built than some of the previous actors who played Dracula. And he played it with a lot of ferocity and toughness, kind of a brutal version of the vampire. But
Mhm.
I thought it was very well done. I really like that. And I think you also could have made an argument for Luis Jordan, who was the Count Dracula in the BBC version. It was a two-part miniseries on television. I believe it was 1977, and it was a very different kind of Dracula, a little bit more romantic, maybe in some ways,
Mm.
genteel in some ways, a little bit reminiscent of Frank Langella. But I thought that was another one that you could have considered.
Nice.
Those are a few. So I think if I were doing this list, I probably would have removed numbers 10, 9, and 8. Adam
Mhm.
Sandler, Caleb Landry Jones, and Nicolas Cage. And I probably would have gone with Francis Lederer, have to include John Carradine in there somewhere, and probably Jack Palance, and then maybe kept out Luis Jordan. Um, but this, all in all, this is a pretty good article. I mean, it sounds like I'm nitpicking it, but it's actually well written. Make some good notes on each one,
Mm.
and some interesting choices that came about here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's good for it kind of to be documented like this. And, I think it would be something I would kind of share with my kids to say, hey, why don't you check out some of these movies? You just never know. Dracula's a pretty cool dude.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that the reason Brian Truitt did this article for USA Today was actually dated February 15th, so it was a few weeks ago,
Mhm.
but it coincided with the release of Luc Besson's Dracula with Caleb Landry Jones.
That's
So
right.
somewhat timely. Always fun, though, to look at the different interpretations of Dracula. Good job by Brian Truitt. And that allows for a very smooth transition, Tracy, into the first of the two films we'll profile on this week's edition of the Ghostly Gallery. And this is a film that did come out in 2025. It's about Dracula, sort of, but more about other characters in the Dracula lexicon. Tell us about this film.
Yeah, so this is called Abraham's Boys, a Dracula story. It's about 90 minutes long, and it's a Shudder original movie directed by Natasha Kermani. And it's based on a short story by Joe Hill, who is the son of Stephen King, which I thought that was pretty cool. The film continues the story that began in the, the novel Dracula, and it takes the narrative in a different direction altogether. Instead of focusing on Count Dracula, this film centers on Abraham Van Helsing, the vampire hunter who helped defeat Dracula in Bram Stoker's novel. So in Abraham's Boys, we meet Van Helsing many, many years later. The story takes place in 1915 in California's Central Valley. So it's about 18 years after the death of Dracula. Van Helsing has left Europe behind him, and he now lives on, like, a remote, I call it a farm. It might not be a farm, but it's kinda like a farmhouse with his
Yeah.
wife, Nina, and their 2 boys. And the family lives in basic total isolation here. Abraham seems very determined to kinda keep it that way. But the outside world, back in that day, it's slowly moving closer to him as the railroads begin construction and they spread through the valley. You've got new workers arriving in the area. And this concerns Abraham very much. He believes the arrival of all of these new people could bring danger with it. And early in the film, it becomes very clear that Van Helsing believes that the vampire threat may not actually be over. So, from the perspective of the oldest boy, his name is Max, there's a lot of stuff that's not making sense to him. He starts questioning why his father insists on keeping the family so isolated and why his mother, Mina, is constantly taking like these bizarre concoctions and medicines and tonics that Abraham prepares for her. So that's just kind of like the overall view of the story. So before we kind of get into like nitty gritty details, what did you think of this, Bruce?
Well, first off, Tracy, I knew almost nothing about this going in. The first mention that was made of this movie, I think, was by our friend Tucker Christine. when he was he was a guest on the show maybe last year. Maybe it was our 100th anniversary episode. I think he mentioned the movie. And when he mentioned the title, Abraham's Boys, the first thing that came into my mind, this is really weird. I thought of Abraham Lincoln's sons. I don't even know if Abraham Lincoln had sons. I'm not sure. So I thought, wow, is this a continuation of Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter? Remember that movie that came out a few years ago? Which
Yes.
is actually a lot better than it sounds. I mean, it's a ridiculous title and a ridiculous story about Abraham Lincoln being a vampire hunter during the Civil War, but it's actually pretty well done. It's an entertaining movie. So I'm thinking maybe this is like a sequel to that, Abraham's Boys. And then I realized, after doing a little more research and after hearing you talk about it, because you saw it before I did, and then I realized, no, this is Abraham Van Helsing that we're talking about here. This is the great vampire hunter. So I look at this and I think, wow, this is kind of a creative and interesting twist on the Dracula story. And I like the fact that rather than putting the focus on Dracula the vampire, it places the emphasis on Van Helsing himself and his family and what happens after Dracula is taken down in 1897.
Right.
And if you look at the history of Van Helsing in both books and the many films that have been done about Dracula, Van Helsing is usually a side character. He's never the main character, at least not that I can think of. He's certainly not the main attraction. He's an important part of the story, but never the featured player. I also found it interesting, Tracy, that the story occurs nearly 20 years after Dracula's death, based on the timeline of Stoker's novel. So this is 2 decades into the future, almost. And it also takes place not in old world Europe, but somewhere in California. I think you mentioned the Central Valley.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at geography, so I don't know much about the Central Valley. This is very much the country.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not Los Angeles. This is not San Diego. I mean, this is very much a rural setting where this film takes place. So I kind of like that right off the bat, this movie decides we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to put the concentration on Van Helsing, his character, his family, and we're going to set this in America, not in the usual locations of Transylvania, London, Germany, where have you. So I really like, from that standpoint, I liked the different turn this took.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I know. I didn't know too much about this, and I actually forgot that it was kind of mentioned in our 100th episode. So I'll have to go back and watch that
Yeah.
and hear because now that you say that, that kind of rings a little bit of a bell. But yeah, no, definitely interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah,
No Lincoln in the movie. So
no,
don't expect any references to our great American president, Civil War. No, that's not here.
and no top hats either.
No top hats. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But this film, it opens up. And so when you first start watching the movie, it opens up with like this moment in the valley and it's kind of disturbing. And you see this young woman, she's walking along this dusty road and she's hoping to catch a ride into town. And she kind of like sits down just because she's exhausted. And I think like way back in like the early 1900s, they, I don't know, had little, what you call them, like snuff boxes or whatever they used to call them. So she's sitting there and she does her thing and she sees this shadowy figure off in the distance. And when we're looking at it, we can't really tell what it is. It's just like a shadowy figure. And then she gets up, and moments later, she disappears. We hear her scream, and then everything goes silent. And then the next scene flashes, and then we come into contact with an older Abraham Van Helsing, and he's returning to the farmhouse. And waiting for him is his wife, Mina, which totally surprised me.
Yeah.
And she's clearly not 100%. Like, she's not well, she's not healthy. And Abraham does seem worried about her health. And later we do see Mina quietly adding some of his little tonics to her drinks. And then we're introduced to her two sons, Max and Rudy. And Max already seems to have questions about his dad and the strange life that they live in isolation. But Rudy, who's much younger, he still trusts his father and believes absolutely everything that he's told. But then one night during this full moon, Max wakes up after hearing very loud noises in the house and he goes to investigate. He finds his father working late inside his locked study. So it's totally locked, can't go in. And at the same time, he hears his mother sitting alone in the dark. And she's quietly talking to herself and she's muttering something. And then you make out the words that the devil is coming. And it's kind of unnerving. It's like, what do you mean the devil is coming?
Mm.
But the next morning, Abraham, he kind of like spills his guts and he tells Max a little bit more of the family story about what's going on and why they are why they are where they are. So he explains that in earlier years, his mother Mina was attacked and her blood was infected by the same creatures that he once hunted in Europe. And according to Abraham, that's why they moved to California so they could live far away from those creatures and keep his mother safe. However, Abraham now believes those creatures may still have a connection to Mina's mind and will potentially return one day. So meanwhile, Mina's condition, it continues to worsen and it happens quite quickly actually. Becomes increasingly frightened and convinced that something is reaching into her thoughts. And Abraham insists that the disease has returned and begins giving her stronger doses of these concoctions and tonics. And at one point, which was kind of disturbing, he performs like a blood transfusion and he's using their son Max as a donor. So that was kind of a little bit unnerving to kind of watch. But her health is declining very, very quickly. So I guess, Bruce, what did you think of like the whole Mina storyline going on here?
Yeah, this is really interesting. In the original novel, it's Mina Murray,
Mhm.
and I believe she's engaged to Mina Harker. So sometimes in the stories, you hear the name Mina Murray, sometimes you hear Mina Harker, sometimes you hear
Mhm.
both. So this is that character. But now she's connected, gotten married to the much older Abraham Van Helsing. I mean, he's got to be what, 20 years older, 25 years
Oh, yeah,
older?
at least.
So it's kind of an odd pairing. And you never think of Van Helsing as a romantic character. You know, he's the hunter. He's the guy that is prepared to use violence against Dracula's violence. You know, he is not a romantic, dashing figure, but somehow he is convinced Mina, hey, I'm the right one for you, even though, you know, I'm 30 years older and I'm not that great looking. So Mina's quite a catch for him. He's really overachieving here, I think, right? Yeah. So that's a little bit different, but you know, it's certainly considering what they both have been through,
Mhm.
understandable, I guess, if they would get together, even though it's not the conventional story. Now, Tracy, at first, I thought that Mina was legitimately ill. And I thought this is either a delayed or prolonged after effect of being bitten by Dracula like 17, 18 years earlier. She
Mhm.
hasn't become a vampire, but she is in a weakened state, is afflicted. And even though Dracula's been killed, she hasn't been totally restored to her previous self. So that's what I thought at the beginning. But then as the movie goes on, start to become more suspicious, especially the way that Van Helsing acts at her bedside. Something seemed off with him. And we're going to find out that, yeah, there is something off with him. Interesting you use the term tonic. I think, does he use that in the movie? Does he say that?
I can't remember if he I think they do. I don't know if it's young Max that mentions the word
Okay.
tonic, but yeah,
So
somebody.
whenever I hear that word tonic, I think of something the barber gives you for your hair,
Oh,
not not something that is going to heal you. I mean, technically, tonic can mean either thing, but tonic here to me, this is not really a tonic. This this is something else. Maybe this is something that is not meant to help Mina and
mhm.
improve her health, but maybe this is meant to keep her health subpar. So the word tonic to me sends up some red flags when I see
Yes.
it in this and hear it in this film. That's what I thought anyway.
Mhm. Oh, I totally understand that actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know tonic and tinctures and little bottles of mysterious stuff.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah, I
always
guess
good.
it's an old-fashioned term, right? But if anybody says, "I'm gonna give you a tonic," I'm like, "No, I don't want a tonic. Call it something else. I don't need a tonic." And I think in this case, Mina doesn't need this tonic either. It's a negative thing. It's detrimental. It's not helpful.
Exactly, and it's not a
Yeah.
gin and tonic, so
No. Right.
right.
Which I don't drink at all. So let's make
Maybe.
that clear.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, tonics can stay away.
Yeah.
Um, oh my gosh. But yeah, so it's been a really interesting story up to this point. And, we kind of flash back to Rudy and Max, and they're out playing, I think it's football, or yeah, it's football in the yard. And the football goes through Van Helsing's window, his office locked study window. So
Mhm.
the boys sneak into the study, they get the ball, they break a picture climbing through the window of their mother. So that just kind of leads the boys into the room, and young Rudy's just kind of, like, fooling around a little bit. He's sitting back in Abraham's chair, and he's got his arms crossed, and he's, like, pretending to smoke on the little pipe, and he's having a grand old time. And so the father, he never lets his children into the study because he does weird things in there. So the boys have a peek around, they're looking at some of this stuff, and they discover hidden behind a blanket, there is a door marked with a cross that leads down into a
Mhm.
basement.
Yeah.
So they get this door open and they look down the stairs and they encounter a horrifying image. There's this woman crawling towards them in the darkness, towards the stairs. But before they can react, Abraham returns and he legit kills her. I can't remember how he kills her. He, like, sticks something in her neck or something, but he kills her right in front of these boys. And then he tells the boys that they're finally old enough to learn the truth. And in one of the film's most disturbing moments, he forces Max to drive a wooden stake into the woman's heart,
Mm.
claiming that she's one of the undead. And Max complies because like, the boys are kind of afraid of their father because he's a little overbearing,
Yeah.
and he does it, and then the focus goes on the youngest boy, Rudy, and Abraham says, "Rudy, it's time for you to remove the woman's head."
Oh boy.
And this boy, I'm sure he's probably maybe 8 years old, maybe 10 years old at the most, maybe,
Yeah.
and of course, he refuses. He's petrified. And from that moment on, Max begins to question absolutely everything that he's been taught by his father. So, Bruce, what did you think about that moment in the basement?
Wow. Yeah. Two things. There's first the killing, then the removing of the head because she's supposedly a vampire. And I thought at that point, yeah, Abraham Van Helsing has lost him right now. He is totally gone. I
Yeah.
mean, why you would expose your young boys to such an atrocity? And the older brother, I always have trouble judging ages. How old do you think he is? 17, 18,
Yeah, he's got to be about
maybe?
16, 17, 18, kind of around that age bracket.
Okay, so he's still a teenager. He's not an adult. I mean, he's basically a high school age
Mhm.
if we use today's standards for high school. I was much older when I was in high school, but that's another story. So you've got just a strange situation. These two young boys, the other is like 8 or 9, as you say.
Mhm.
Why would you make them take part in this, witness what is going on, whatever is going on in that basement? And up until then, I actually looked at Abraham Van Helsing somewhat sympathetically, and I'm still hoping that he's going to turn out to be all right. But then you start to realize, yeah, there's something sinister going on. And I really did lose sympathy for him and lost faith in him as a force of good. And it's a huge turning point in the film. And at that point, you start to realize there's probably no turning back for Van Helsing. He's not going to come back and become a hero after this.
Yeah, exactly. It's, definitely it was quite the little twist there.
Yeah.
And it kind of like it gets a little worse for him as the story goes on too, because we're still dealing with Nina and her illness, and she's going downhill quite fast. And for a moment, she becomes very lucid. He's like trying to pump tonics into her body, and she becomes lucid and she looks right at him, and she tells Abraham that she once believed that he saved her from these creatures that had attacked her, but now she fears she may have fallen deeper into his delusion. And that right there was like this huge, huge moment in time. And it wasn't long after that she dies. She passes away. And then there's like this funeral for their mother. It's just the boys, Abraham and a priest, and they bury her up in the yard. And that's the end of Nina. And it's really interesting because the truth about Abraham's past, it starts to unravel because now we're starting to see a visitor come back from London, and it's a gentleman by the name of Arthur Homewood, who's one of the men that had hunted Dracula with Van Helsing. He comes to the farm and he has a conversation, and Arthur admits that he now believes that Abraham manipulated him into killing his fiancée Lucy years earlier after convincing him that she had also become one of the undead.
Hmm.
So Max overhears this entire conversation and he realizes that his father has been wrong all this time. And Max confronts him, which is not a great thing because Abraham refuses to abandon his beliefs. And he
Yeah.
becomes convinced that all of these workers on the railroad, they need to be eliminated before they bring more people to the valley. He locks Max into the basement and he takes Rudy to the camp where these workers are living. Max escapes this basement and he rushes to try to put a stop to everything that's about to happen. And in this final confrontation, Abraham is trying to force the youngest boy, Rudy, to kill a young woman who is on the camp because he believes and he tells Rudy that she's also been infected. So she's like that lady in the basement. She's part of the undead and she needs to be taken care of. He gives him like a mallet and a stake, and he wants her to die by a stake in the heart. But before Rudy can react, Max intervenes, and there's a lot of chaos that kind of follows. And one really disturbing scene. Um, but the gist of it is that Max is able to stop Abraham and put an end to this and an end to Abraham. And then the film, it wraps up and you see Max and Rudy leaving the farmhouse behind, walking away together to start a brand new life, free from the overshadow of Abraham Van Helsing and the story of their life. And that's kind of where it ends. Um, I thought this Abraham Boy movie, I thought it was pretty good, actually. It was such an interesting take on the Dracula story. It's not something that I would have ever thought of, actually. Um, I really like the idea of looking at what might have happened after the events of Dracula and seeing where things did end up with Van Helsing and Mina. I never would have dreamed they would have had a life together, but that's interesting. Um, It's definitely not your traditional vampire movie. It's more like a psychological story, and you're trying to figure out, is Abraham a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he protecting his family, or is he totally bananas and he's just gone too far? You just don't know. Um, it wasn't a scary movie. I did not find it was scary at all. It was just for me, it was just a really interesting watch, and it was kind of like a mystery movie, and I enjoyed the interpretation of this, and I did give it 3 stars. Like, I landed on 3 stars, but, I thought it was pretty decent. How about you?
Well, let me ask you, you didn't find it scary. What about the scene toward the end where, the young girl has been trapped and then Max steps in? You didn't find that at all scary?
No, no,
Okay.
I didn't. I think only because he I guess maybe it was a little bit unnerving, I guess, to
Okay.
see
Yeah.
what was what he does to his dad.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that not scary, I think just unnerving, but I mean, you think about how far these kids were pushed and the beliefs that were kind of, like, put onto them, and I totally get why he did what he did to kinda put a stop to all this madness, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was unnerving, but not scary at the same time.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about casting in a film
Mhm.
before I give you my final thoughts and final take on this. I don't think we've mentioned that Titus Welliver is the star. He plays Abraham Van Helsing. We don't think of him as a horror actor. I think of him first and foremost as the determined Los Angeles police investigator in the excellent TV series Bosch. He did that for several seasons, and he's continuing to make appearances in the follow-up series to that called Ballard. So he's a dramatic actor, and we think of him first and foremost as a policeman, an investigator, not as a horror movie guy. But I thought he's quite good as Van Helsing. He has a fairly believable European accent. There's a steady determination that we see in him at the beginning to eliminate vampires. And obviously, he has a very strict hand with his 2 young sons. I mean, this is not Mike Brady from the Brady Bunch. This is, an old school, old world father, very tough, very hard on the kids. And maybe at first we want to think that he's doing it for their best, but then we learn that's really not the case. I thought Titus Welliver made this character believable. But I also thought that he made us alternate from admiring him, especially early in the film, to then starting to loathe him the more and more the story progresses. And then there's the other main actor, the actress Jocelyn Donahue. She plays Abraham's wife, the former Mina Murray. Donahue is certainly more familiar to horror fans than Titus Welliver. She was the star of the 2009 film House of the Devil, which is excellent. And as with that film, she is very good in her role here, playing Mina with charm and grace and vulnerability because she was earlier attacked and bitten by Dracula, or at least allegedly attacked and bitten by Dracula, who may or may not have existed to begin with, given what we have learned in this movie. So really good performances from both Donahue and Welliver. Abraham's Boys in general makes a lot out of a small budget. It's a very simple setting, a fairly attractive middle class home in the hills of California. You say a farmhouse, but really a nice farmhouse.
Yeah.
The cast is very small. You've got the 4 members of the Van Helsing family, along with a few other people that pass through. So you can tell they didn't didn't have a lot of money to make this film, but I think they make the most of it. And the makeup effects, while limited, are quite good. I also like the pacing and the presentation of the twists in the stories. Certainly from the start of the film to the midway developments, there are a lot of things that happen that I did not expect. And these are things that make us question whether Van Helsing is on the side of good or has somehow completely lost his way. And then, of course, we have the major reveal at the end of the film, which, didn't really surprise either of us completely, but it was also done in kind of a stunning manner. And I thought that was very effective.
Mhm.
I'll tell you, the only thing I didn't really like about this movie is the title, Abraham's Boys. You first hear the title, gives you a little clue as to what this is about. I think a better title would have been maybe Van Helsing's Boys or Van Helsing in America or After Dracula, something like that. I think this was a Shudder production.
Yeah.
I don't know that it made a big splash last year. I wonder with a better title, a more revealing title about what this movie's really about, I wonder if it might have done better. Not that it was in theaters, but might have gotten more publicity, more attention. It flew under the radar in a year that was very strong on horror. All in all, though, I enjoyed the movie. It was a little bit slow at first, but then the pacing does pick up for the rest of the film. Kept waiting for that closer look at Dracula, which doesn't really come. But the story's well presented, shows a lot of creativity, especially taking place in America in the California countryside. Welliver and Donahue really carry the film with their performances. So I agree with you. I think this is a very good movie, solid movie, 3 stars for Abraham's Boys. So that's my take on it.
Oh, awesome. That's fantastic. And, you know, it's kind of like one of those little independent horror films, and I look for stuff like that, and it's definitely something that people should try to find and give it a good watch. It's interesting. Don't go in expecting like the vampire movie or anything like that, but it's just it's a cool twist on the story.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, if you like vampires, if you like the Dracula story, definitely this is a film that you should watch. And even if you don't, I think it's probably worth a look. So that's our first film of this show, Abraham's Boys. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will look at another film from 2025, completely different from Abraham's Boys. It is a film that ventures into the world of zombies. It's called We Bury the Dead. We'll be back to talk about that in a moment. Stay with us on the Ghostly Gallery. Welcome back to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, and time now to move on to our second film. Bruce Markusen and Tracy Asteria with you on the show. We will talk now about 2025's We Bury the Dead. This is a film that centers on Ava Newman, an American who is traveling to Tasmania as part of an Australian relief mission. Tasmania has been hit with the devastating effects of an American experimental weapon that was accidentally set off. The blast from the weapon renders people brain dead immediately, resulting in thousands of deaths and wiping out entire cities. The Australian military learns that some of the victims, though, started to come back to life. They're violent, they're dangerous, and they're also without cognitive abilities. So that all translates into they are zombies. Ava takes part in the relief mission ostensibly to help identify and collect the deceased. But in actuality, she's got a higher priority. She is searching for her husband, Mitch, who, as bad luck would have it, was in southern Tasmania at the time of this accident. He was in the town of Woodbridge, attending a business conference at this very moment. Ava believes that Mitch might be one of the victims who's come back to life, and she holds out hope that these undead people might regain brain function and intelligence, so that maybe gives Mitch a chance that he could come back as well. As part of this relief mission effort, Ava has teamed up with a native Australian named Clay. He is foul-mouthed and obnoxious, but eventually does become supportive of Ava in her quest to find Mitch. So one day, Clay and Ava discover the remains of kind of a wild party. Looks like it took place in a garage. All the people are now dead. They have not come back to life, but they're dead. And important to Clay and Ava, they have left behind working motorcycles. Well, Ava soon learns that Clay is an accomplished motorcycle driver, and she devises a plan whereby the two of them can slip out from under military observation and take a series of highway roads to Woodbridge. Now, coming within a few miles of their destination, Ava and Clay are resting in an abandoned gas station, and that's where they encounter a lone zombie that comes at them. Fortunately, they are saved at the last minute by a soldier who is named Riley. But after he saves them, he decides he's going to interrogate Clay and find out what exactly the two of them are doing in a territory they're not supposed to be in. So he takes Clay into a nearby bathroom, and of all places, that's where he conducts this interrogation. Ava's in another room. She falls asleep. Several hours later, Ava wakes up and is told by Riley that Clay has escaped from his custody. Ava understandably seems skeptical of this, as I was when I heard this story, bogus story, I think that it may have been. And it starts to make us wonder if Riley, this soldier, who is a bit off, may have killed Clay. Or maybe he let Clay escape. Who knows? There's something questionable about Riley. Riley then offers to drive Ava to Woodbridge. But during their nighttime ride, he insists on stopping at a house to rest and have some food. And it turns out this is Riley's house. So they sit down to eat, but after the meal, Riley makes a very strange request, asking Ava to dress in the clothes of his deceased wife, Ginger, and have a ceremonial dance with him in their bedroom. And yeah, this is really creepy. So Ava reluctantly agrees to this. She's figuring, okay, I'll go along just so that we can get on with our mission to Woodbridge. But as they conclude their dance, Riley becomes upset because he notices that Ava did not wear his own wife's wedding ring, which he claims was an important part of the dance ritual. So he tells Ava they have to start this dance over again, and she's got to wear the ring. But by this point, Ava realizes that Riley has become completely irrational and refuses the demand, understandably. So she runs out of the bedroom, only to make a shocking discovery in another room of this small house. Ava then tries to escape, runs outside of the house into a barn, and there awaits another upsetting discovery. And this leads to a more violent confrontation. Eventually, this will bring Ava to a very unwanted development in Woodbridge, development that I did not see coming. So that's the basic storyline for this film, We Bury the Dead. Tracy, what were your initial observations of this story?
Well, this was the very first horror movie of 2026 that I watched, and I was super interested in seeing it because I heard so many great things from people that had watched it at film festivals or early releases, and there was just so much online buzz about it.
So this
Um,
came out in 2026?
yeah, so but it was kinda 2025 because there were release festivals and
I see.
some,
Yeah.
like, previews, but officially launched in 2026.
Okay.
Um, and because it's an Australian film, what was it? I wanna say it was released a little bit earlier in Australia before it was released in America. I think
Okay.
that if I remember, that's how it worked. But, yeah, it's they classify it as either 2025 or 2026, like, it kinda goes both ways.
Okay.
But, yeah, um, but, oh my gosh, one thing that stood out for me right away about this movie was just the whole idea behind the concept and how, like, this weapon accidentally went off and it affected this one region in Tasmania, and I thought it was just a really interesting setup for the story.
Mm.
And then the fact that some of these victims or they started to reanimate afterwards, I thought that was really intriguing because it wasn't all of them. It was just certain ones, and definitely not your usual zombie type creatures.
Yeah.
And because not everyone turns, the one I guess the ones that do kinda come back, it kind of felt like they were coming back to complete something or to finish something, or they had unfinished business, something along those lines. But that idea really kept me really curious about where this whole story was actually gonna go and what Ava was going to find when she finally finds her husband when she gets to Woodbridge. So, it was, like, a really interesting storyline, and I was curious to kinda watch this one all the way through and see how this whole thing was gonna end.
Yeah, I think it is an interesting take on the whole zombie subgenre, and it's different. It's not the same old thing, which I like. Tracy, let's talk a little bit about the cast here. So Ava, the lead, is played very well by an actress named Daisy Ridley, who is perhaps best known for starring in the Star Wars sequel trilogy from 2015 to 2019. Did you watch any of those movies?
I did not. I'm more of a
You did
Star
not.
Trek fan.
Okay. All right. I have not seen them either. My daughter has seen them and liked them, but I thought maybe you had. Daisy Ridley is an English actress, but she takes on a flawless American accent while playing Ava in a very sympathetic, although somewhat reckless, dangerous manner. As her story progresses, she runs into obstacle after obstacle. She becomes more hardened before discovering an unfortunate truth about her husband, Mitch. The other key player is an actor named Brenton Thwaites. He plays Clay, and he delivers a really good, wide ranging performance. He is arrogant, crude, immature, not very sympathetic toward the Tasmanian victims. He has to collect their bodies, but he does so in a kind of a disrespectful way. Doesn't show much sympathy for them. And even though this is like a volunteer effort, he almost makes it seem like he doesn't really want to do this, but
Mhm.
he's doing it anyway. Eventually, though, he makes a connection with Ava. At first, I'm thinking they're not getting along and it's only going to worsen, but it goes the other way. And he starts to sympathize with her plight, that he's willing to risk his own life to help her. And he's the accomplished, motorcycle rider.
Mhm.
And he is going to take them down to this town of Woodbridge to try to find Mitch. So, and he's obviously, he's putting his life on the line in doing so. As the movie progresses, we do learn eventually about hardships of Clay's own life. And we learn he's not exactly the brash and confident character that he tries to be. That's kind of a front, almost an act that he's putting on. And then the third key actor is a guy named Mark Cole Smith. He plays Riley, this soldier who's a little off kilter, well, more than a little. Right from the start, Smith plays the character in a way that makes us suspicious, even when he saves the two protagonists from a zombie attack. You're still not confident that he's really that interested in their welfare. So at first he's heroic in saving Ava and Riley, but then he shows himself to be dishonest and deceitful, and he really becomes unhinged. We learn that his wife died from the blast of the biochemical weapon. His whole insistence that Ava do this crazy dance ritual in their bedroom. I mean, it's pretty cringeworthy, but it's effectively done. I mean, the actors are very good here. In fact, all three of the main actors, I think, really deliver. They give us
Mhm.
layered efforts, putting on facades at the start before showing their true colors, both good and bad. These are not one-dimensional cardboard cutout characters. They're much more complicated than that, and they do surprise and even shock us along the way. So, of these three, was there anyone that really stood out for you, or did you think they were all pretty darn good as I did?
I thought they were all really good. I did like Daisy Ridley, and I thought she really stood out as Ava.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm pretty sure I haven't really seen her in anything because I haven't watched those Star Wars movies. But I appreciated like the strength and determination that she showed right from the start of this movie. Just time and time again willing to go into these disaster zones, facing danger, just trying to find her husband, right? Um, and it was really interesting. Like we would get these little flashbacks of her life before, and you kind of started to sympathize with her because you could kind of see some of I guess, the sadness about why she wanted to find her husband so bad. But I think she did an excellent job. They all did, and the actor that played Riley, Mark Cole Smith, I thought he was super creepy, and he did a really good job. He was very believable
Yeah. Yeah.
as a creepy person. So, yeah.
You've run into people like that at times? Oh,
Yes.
hopefully not. Yeah.
Maybe not quite as bad, but yeah,
Yeah.
they're out
Yeah.
there.
You keep them at arm's length, right?
Ex give them give them tonics.
Yeah, I think you're on the money. Yeah, Daisy Ridley was the standout here, but all three of these performers did a good job, and there was because there was not that much in the way of zombie violence. I mean, these actors they had to really act. They had to perform dialogue. There was a lot of drama that they had to convey, and they were pretty skilled at it. So it's not a typical zombie film. We don't see armies of zombies like we did in The Walking Dead. Instead, we're mostly shown solitary creatures. They're not really in packs. Usually it's one at a time. And they might make a charge at somebody, although they're pretty slow for the most part. They really are, they come across as more human than they are dangerous monsters in a way. And really, the zombies, to be honest, are not the primary monsters in the film. They're in some ways side pieces, though they do make Ava's quest of finding Mitch more difficult to fulfill. Now, the true villains in this movie are the human characters, which have the abilities of intelligence and reason only to disappoint us and the protagonists as well. As for the zombies, one of the things I really liked was the clicking noises that they make, both with their mouths and the movements of their bones. Sounds like their bones are crunching at
Oh, yeah.
times, and their mouths are clicking. I thought this was really unique and effective. That sound is something I've not really heard in other films from this kind of subgenre. So I thought that was really cool. A few other notes on the movie. It's a beautifully filmed movie. Some powerful landscape scenes in Australia, capped by the smoky red skies, the aftermath of this biological weapon that somehow got set off. It was not supposed to. It was an accident. From a technical standpoint, really, it's nearly a flawless film. It's very well done, well edited, well presented. I know that for some people, the lack of zombies is a problem. It's not for me. We've seen zombies time and time again in TV and in movies. We don't need to see hundreds or thousands of them in one shot. It's been done. The tension between Ava and the soldier named Riley, along with a major twist at the end, I think really made this a worthwhile film. It's creative, different from what we usually see from zombie movies. Not just different, but it was well done too. 3.5 stars. That is what I give We Bury the Dead. Tracy, what do you say on this one?
I thought it was a really great movie. I thought it was really well shot, very impressive scenery. Um, I thought the atmosphere was great. I didn't find it was like particularly gory or really disturbing. Um, it was slower paced, like you mentioned, and it was kind of sad in spots. Um, One thing that really got to me though, Bruce, and you mentioned it, was the teeth chattering or the clicking sounds. Um,
Yeah.
it honestly, like, to me, it was like, oh, it's one of those noises, and it just really went right through me. It was like nails down a chalkboard. Every time I heard
Mm,
it, I was like, I can't listen. I cover my ears because I'm like, I hate that noise so much.
yeah.
It was terrible, and that's the one thing I will remember about this movie, honestly. Yes,
That's
that was
probably the desired effect. They probably wanted you to feel that way.
it was so unnerving, and I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't terrifying, it was just, Oh, it was so disturbing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that whoever decided to do that unique feature deserves an award for just, like, the creep factor experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this film also had some really great emotional moments too. Um, the one moment that really stood out for me is when she got away from Riley and she was trying to go find her husband. She comes across this family, I think, that had an RV or a trailer or something,
Yeah.
and the family had passed away from this weapon, but the father had reanimated, and again, it kinda goes back to he was reanimated for a purpose because he wanted to take care of his family, and it was a really gentle moment because Ava saw it. First, she was afraid, but she helped this man, this zombified man, help bury the family, so I thought that was a really moving moment, and
Yeah.
know, she she helped him kind of end things so he could be buried with his family as well. But it was like a very memorable moment in the movie to show that even though these people had died and come back, it was for a reason. And this in this case, it was such a heartwarming, I guess, reason. But I thought it was a really good watch, and I would recommend it to people, especially if they like slower paced films and maybe they like the sense of a zombie movie without all of the zombies. I think this would be really great.
Hmm.
Um, I did set it at 3 stars for me,
Okay.
but I did like it. I thought it was such again, it's a unique twist on things, unique twist on that story.
I think you were telling me at one point that you were reading reviews of it, and a lot of horror fans didn't really like the film because of the supposed lack of action.
Mhm, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
'Cause the reviews were kind of, like, all over the place, but a lot of them were, like, from not from movie reviewers as such, but, like, just general fans on, like, Reddit and,
Yeah.
like, places like that. I think even their IMDb page for this movie is just throttled with fans saying that they didn't really care for this movie because it was so slow and, "Oh my gosh, where are these zombies at?" Right? But they for as many comments like that, they just kind of missed what the story was actually about.
Yeah.
Um, it wasn't about zombies really, like, it was about something completely different, and I think if you go into watching this movie without a whole list of expectations, I think you'll be able to sit back and enjoy it and take it for what it is.
Yeah, this is not about flesh eating or flesh chomping. If you're looking for that, put The Walking Dead back on or one of those many sequel shows. You know, pick another film. This is something totally different. But I think you're right. I think that people who are knocking that, they're really missing the point. And I
Yep,
think there's an intelligence here in this film. There's a level of drama that's trying to hit maybe a different kind of fan, maybe trying to hit non-horror fans in some ways.
yeah,
But obviously we're horror fans and we both liked it. So you give it 3 stars. I give it 3.5. This one, I'm safe in saying I'm very comfortable in saying, highly recommend this one.
yeah.
Definitely worth watching. So that will do it for this week's episode of the Ghostly Gallery. The two films that we talked about, We Bury the Dead. Both Tracy and I highly recommend this one. Tracy gives it 3.5, 3 stars, I should say. I go a little bit higher at 3.5. A different kind of a zombie film, but one that we both feel is worth looking at. And then earlier we gave a nice review, in-depth review of Abraham's Boys, one of the 2025 films that dealt with vampires, specifically Dracula, the aftermath of Dracula, and the story of Van Helsing. Both Tracy and I liked that one as well. We each give Abraham's Boys 3 stars. Tracy, as always, we thank you for your help, your major contributions. Thanks for being with us.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Bruce. This was a lot of fun.
So that will wrap things up for this edition of the Ghostly Gallery podcast. We do appreciate all of you joining us, listening, watching as well. We appreciate the fact that you decided to join us in this museum of the macabre. And we do hope we'll see you again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.